My name is Kate Johnson, and I am the lead chaplain here at Queen's. I welcome you this afternoon on behalf of Kurt's wife and partner, April, and their collegial family within the geology department. Welcome to friends, neighbors, supporters, both professional and personal, as well as direct family members and those joining us by video conference this afternoon. This event is meant very much to be a celebration of the life of Dr. Kurt T. Kyser, who was a partner, a mentor, a scientist, and a community builder. Kurt wanted a celebration of life, but that does not rule out sadness. While our tone will be mostly light and celebratory, you would not have bothered to join us today if you had not suffered a great loss. Given that, we are here to mark both grief and gratitude. Some of you are experiencing your first brush with death in Dr. Kyser's passing. Sadness and gratitude, a whole mess of emotions, are all part of what it means to mark a loss. Sharing in rituals like this one can help, as well as speaking to each other and continuing to work as a community to find your way through this. We encourage you to engage in this time of reflection this afternoon, but also to reach out to your peers, to my office, or to Student Wellness for support if you need help in processing your grief. A number of Kurt's colleagues are going to speak with us this afternoon, but we are going to start with a reflection that April has written and quite courageously decided to read for herself.
Kurt often reminded me, and a lot of us here, that the CUFR was our raison d'etre. It was our purpose. The postdocs, the graduate students, the undergrads, associates, and collaborators, and that the CUFR and the department, the faculty and the staff should always maintain a learning and teaching environment. He also said whenever a lot of us in the lab, Chip, myself, when we were confused by the science or trying to figure out a problem, he would always say, "You'll figure it out." When we were discouraged, we aren't saving lives here. We may not even be making the world a better place. So let's get back to work. Kurt was allowed many opportunities, challenges, and encouragements as a young scientist by many visionaries that were his mentors, colleagues, and friends. Early on, as a graduate student with Jim O'Neill at the USGS in Menlo Park, and then when he became an academician, built his first lab with the help and encouragement of Glenn Caldwell and Hugh Hendry at University of Saskatchewan. Fred Longstaff, John Ludden, Frank Hawthorne, and Noel James forged early, long-lasting, sustained friendships, both professionally and personally, serving on NSERC. There were personal and professional relationships that were extended to me with Larry Lahusen, Christopher Oates, and Jim Harlot. And here again, when he built his second laboratory, again with the help of Noel and Herb Helmstead. And now, the new additions to the department that will forge further Dan Layton Matthews and Matt Laybourne, and to help make a lot of what he did possible with the help of Chuck Douthit and the Isomass family, Nick Binder, and now Peter Stowe. And Kurt extended much of these same opportunities to us. But as much as he influenced the next generation of scientists, he was rewarded equally by many of you in return, including the neighbors, families, friends, both professionally and personally, that are nearby and are remote. His legacy can now be best honored and preserved by extending those privileges to the next generations of scientists through curiosity, determination, and passion, with the principles of hard work and dedication. And as Pierre reminded me earlier, Kurt always believed that it's not just enough to be smart, but you also have to be nice and to share the knowledge. It is only powerful if it's shared. Kurt and I shared more than 38 years together, having met in 1979. I can't envision my life without us at each other's side in nearly every aspect of our lives. My first encounter with Kurt while we were both working in rival laboratories at the USGS in Denver is vivid, and that encounter changed my life and my world forever. Following Kurt's death, my life has once again changed abruptly, and it couldn't be more different. That was my life then, and this is my life now. But the love, his memories, and his presence in my life endures. And though Kurt's death was sudden and too early in life, I take great comfort knowing that it was quick and while doing something about which he was passionate. And something I have thought a lot about since his death, that Megan Zillian reminded me when she visited me shortly after Kurt's death and told me he was looking at the wonder and thinking about the science. And now I can only say thank you, Habibi Kurt, for all you gave me, and that we did go back to work. And we will indeed get back to work when the celebration is over.
So April mentioned the name of Professor Fred Longstaff from the University of Western Ontario, a good friend and colleague of Kurt's, and he will be our first speaker this afternoon.
So my friend and most trusted colleague of 4 decades, Kurt Kyser, has left us. And this leaves an unrepairable rent in our lives and in the fabric of international isotope science. And in life. In life, the partnership of April and Kurt was unmatched in my experience. And so we are here today, April, not only to honor Kurt, but to offer whatever support we can to you in our fumbling ways. Born in Montana, Kurt grew up in the California sunshine. He attended UC San Diego for his BSc before moving upstate to Berkeley, where he completed his MA and PhD. As April mentioned, there was a good dose of the USGS also in his work there and also during his postdoc. And, you know, as April also mentioned, that's where they first met. And I believe, and I hope many of you will share the same opinion, that probably one of the most significant contributions to science and society ever made by the USGS was the introduction of Kurt and April. Clearly an impact factor of at least 400. Kurt's sojourns included a NATO postdoc in the University of Paris, where he perfected his impeccable French, of which I was always jealous, and where Kurt also strengthened his formidable palate for red wine, which served us all very, very well in the years later at wine-drenched conference dinners. After his PhD, Kurt went to the University of Saskatchewan, and he is the recruit of whom my colleague Glenn Caldwell is the most proud. Kurt brought new vitality to the Department of Saskatchewan, establishing a stunningly effective stable isotope laboratory there in short order. He explored research questions ranging from uranium mineralization to the isotope stratigraphy of the Western Interior Basin, the results of which remain today benchmarks of excellence. I first met Kurt in Saskatoon. I traveled there shortly after he had arrived. I wanted to meet this interloper from the US, who I thought was going to crush my budding ambitions to build a stable isotope laboratory at the University of Alberta. And I'd seen his CV. I thought, how can I ever compete with this guy, even then? So instead, on my time in Saskatchewan, Kurt showed me everything. He showed me all the little details that you need for this and that procedure. You know, the stuff they never put in the papers, but it doesn't work unless you use it. He made up a little care package of bits and bobs of stuff that I would need to get going and instructions on where to get more. And of course, he plied me with red wine and food, and he introduced me to, even then, an outrageously energetic group of highly motivated graduate students. In short, Kurt showed me the way. On that day, Kurt lost his wallet. At meetings for years thereafter, all conversations with Kurt would start with, "You stole my wallet." The westerly winds took Kurt to the Department of Geological Sciences and Geological Engineering here at Queen's in 1995 as a Queen's National Scholar and then later as a Queen's Research Chair. What a catch for Queen's. No doubt a big part of the attraction was the chance to work even more closely with his renowned carbonate colleague, Noel James. At Queen's, Kurt repeated the Saskatchewan miracle on even a grander scale, establishing the Queen's Facility for Isotope Research, which today is the most outstanding facility of its type in Canada and in the top single handful in North America. For me, there are three hallmarks of CUFR that I commend to you today. First, Kurt imbued it with a multidisciplinary scope, from basalts and mantle xenoliths and uranium to bugs and trees and soils. At CUFR, isotope science has been used as a tool to understand the whole Earth system. Second, Kurt led CUFR's efforts in a way that focused on applying isotopes to real problems. Third, and this is by far the most important, Kurt allowed students and postdocs to make their own measurements, to cross the hallowed threshold into the laboratory, to see how the ironmongery actually worked, to understand with pump oil under their fingernails how it was you made an isotopic measurement, and to learn respect for that isotopic measurement, and to make mistakes and to learn from them. This is a seemingly very expensive way to run a laboratory. And I know from experience, I left out the word bitter, I know from experience that it's frowned upon in any business-oriented university. But at the Queen's Facility for Isotope Research, it doesn't operate as a business. It's a family of dedicated isotopists devoted to scholarship and education. That is how Kurt so wisely created CUFR. Long may CUFR continue to prosper in this image, for this is what has had the most impact on those who have passed through its doors. Deep breath. My daughter, Megan, was one of those hundreds. Kurt and April took in this Queen's History, English, and Music major undergraduate for 4 summers as part of the Queen's Undergraduate Research Experience program and turned her into a mean, lean, feather-analyzing machine. Megan's now finishing a PhD in UBC in history, and she still says to this day that the time here at CUFR provided her with the experience that constitutes her only marketable skill. Kurt was a larger-than-life personality. He was always recognizable by his cool Hawaiian shirts. His Hawaiian shirts were always better than mine, which is why I didn't wear one today, because I couldn't compete. And he would fill any room that he entered, not because he was loud, but because he had a magic that made everyone with whom he spoke feel valued. Kurt would give you his undivided attention, and he would listen. And he was so smart, and he was so widely read that he could offer advice on just about any question you might pose in isotope science. But there was a formidable substance behind Kurt's charisma. Together with more than 100 graduate students and an equal number of undergraduate and postdoctoral researchers and colleagues, Kurt amassed a record of more than 600 refereed publications, which have attracted more than 7,000 citations and an H-index of 42 across the span of isotope science. His prowess was recognized early in many, many ways, including a Stacey Memorial Fellowship, a Killam Research Fellowship, and by election while he was still in his early 40s to the Royal Society of Canada. Boy, or should I say old boys, did his Hawaiian shirts fit in well at the Royal Society of Canada. The Royal Society of Canada also subsequently awarded Kurt their Miller Medal for excellence in research in the earth sciences. Kurt also won just about every research honor that the Mineralogical and Geological Associations of Canada had to offer. The past president's medals of both organizations, the MAC Hawley Medal, and just in May of this year, here at Queen's during the annual meeting of the GACMAC, for which Kurt was the local organizing committee chair, the GAC Dairy Medal for Economic Geology. Kurt was also named a Fellow of the Mineralogical Society of America, and in 2008-09, he was a Distinguished Lecturer of the Association of Applied Geochemists. You know, every organization wanted a piece of Kurt, because he would always get the job done, and he would do it well, to wit the GAC meeting here just a few months ago. Most recently, he was also serving as the editor-in-chief of the Geological Society of London's journal Geochemistry, which focused on exploration, environment, and analysis. In the past, he's been the president of the Mineralogical Association of Canada and played very influential roles with the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council over a long period of time, ranging as chair of the Grant Selection Committee for Earth Sciences to group chair for the Penelope right across the earth sciences, environmental sciences, and interdisciplinary sciences. And he was also commonly called upon to lead reviews for the Canada Foundation for Innovation. Kurt was not one of those highway outcrop isotopists who would chip off a rock at the side of the road and then drive 100 kilometers to the next outcropping where the same out-of-context despoiling of the feature would happen. He believed in the integration of fieldwork and geochemistry and would regularly slog through the swamps or the jungles, whatever was required, to establish a firm geological or environmental underpinning for the subsequent isotopes and geochemistry. He was a go-to collaborator for academics and industry colleagues alike, and his work literally spanned the globe. Never have I met someone that has imbued his hundreds of students, staff, colleagues, and collaborators over the decades with such joy in research, such a sense of team and camaraderie, and such a fierce loyalty and love for the leader. When Kurt and I would meet, as I made a point of doing regularly because I had so much to learn from him, I would always ask, "How are things going?" And sometimes, after he asked why I stole his wallet, he would say, "You know, the ducks are all over the lawn." With the loss of Kurt, our ducks are definitely all over the lawn, but with time, we will get them sort of back in a row. And you know, and with apologies to the original poet, I note that while the leader of the band is gone, his blood runs through our thinking now, and his way is in our souls. Our lives may be a poor attempt to imitate the man, but we can be a living legacy. To the leader of the band.
Thomas Curtis Kyser. Hey, dude, you got it wrong again. Denver beat Dallas. These words, they'll always echo in my ears, or words like them. The greetings of my dear and so generous friend. Thanks to all of you for coming to honor this man, warts and all. One of the most outstanding but complex people I've ever known. He and I met for the first time at an NSERC assessment meeting in Victoria. And while, reviewing the fascinating research proposals, realized that we had very joint interests, especially diving in warm waters, and even perish the thoughts, carbonates. As Fred has said, Kurt came first here as a Queen's Scholar. And during that year, we at Queen's all realized this was no ordinary person amongst our midst. His talents as an organizer and as a teacher, supervisor, mentor, and mediocre scientist led to his joining us here at Queen's, and soon, of course, the rapid expansion of our geochemical presence, both in the nation and abroad. And as everyone knows, these early years quickly led to, with the guiding presence of April and Chips, the establishment of Kyser, and recognized, as Fred says, as perhaps the world's leading premier geochemical laboratory. His research with me and so many others, as we'll hear later on perhaps, was both academic and industrial. And herein, I think, lies much of his academic legacy. But at the same time, as all of us watched him, it required the delicate balance of people, equipment, funding, students, and I still don't know how he managed it. I really don't. He can be best described as an American, California boy, but a frustrated Francophone at heart, who loved living in Canada. His love of good wine was legendary. Whenever we would go out to dinner, I'd have to see my banker first. After all the perfunctory, my bottle of white wine, he would tolerate this and then grab the wine list and say, hiding it so I could not see, mumble something to the waiter, which was, of course, probably a finished Bordeaux, about 5 times the cost of my paltry white wine, then another one. He was incorrigible. I disagree with Fred. Kurt always dressed his best, and his best could be totally outlandish. His shirts with the lovely giant fish, his shirts with the spiders running up and down them, and of course, his red pants. He sadly was, his own fashion consultant. But, he loved his lab. He was terribly happy there, but he also loved the field. I've been with him across the spectrum, in the outback, in the Arctic, in the mountains, and of course, diving and on the ocean. It's funny, he was a good observer, but it was interesting that not perhaps what we wanted him to see, but things that we weren't really cognizant of. and always seeing the things we had missed, and of course, delighting in telling us about it. And when we were in the outback, I remember him first saying to me, "Noel, be careful. Everything here can kill you." And of course, unlike me, he was a great sailor. He was fascinated by all things marine. He particularly liked, sitting on the back deck in the midst of all the action on a research vessel, even at night, on the graveyard shift, and he had to look and comment on everything. Everything that came up from deck from the bottom, all the temperature salinity data had to be plotted immediately. And regardless of the watch times, he was amazed at all things. One night when he was on graveyard shift, he broke into my cabin to tell me, "Hey, dude, we've been sailing for 2 days now and the seafloor is still flat." "Yeah?" And he said, "But of course, it's submarine Saskatchewan." He was equally enthralled when diving in the Southern Ocean, the cold waters of the Southern Ocean. And for a whole bunch of time, I just never realized why I was always in the front. Till he, of course, told me one day, "Yeah, of course. Don't you realize the great whites are all around us?" But he loved the gentle roll of the ship on the quiet evening and abused all of us about the green flash until he finally saw it. And the vastness of the ocean and the camaraderie of life at sea were things he truly enjoyed. He reveled particularly in our times in Bermuda, the times in the water when he was supposed to be showing students things on the seafloor. He was, of course, hunting all nooks and crannies for lobsters that he could pull out. And then, of course, he ate them constantly. He was at home with Rudy the bartender, in the endless dark and stormies, at the Hogpenny pub on the waterfront. He learned the names of all the organisms and corrected me more than once. But most of all, revealing to the students the miracles and information gained from chemical analyses of waters that they had collected that day. Much better than looking at sand grains with Noel. We love doing science together, but I must confess that he saved my intellectual skin more than once. When once again I let my imagination get the better of me. But it was curious that with all his breakthroughs and publications, he rarely gave papers at scientific meetings. He would analyze what his colleagues had said, and he would revel in the camaraderie of his treasured friends. Yes, he did love organizing meetings and editing journals, even though he stressed how much he hated it, but was great on bowling out duties to everyone else. In short, he was loved, reviled, envied by his students, the lab rats, the postdocs. They were, in a sense, his children, and he cared for them and worried about them, sometimes when he should not have. Regardless, lucky them. Okay, in these few words, I've just touched the surface of some parts of this complex man who was my dear friend. Thanks for listening, because I have spoken, of course, from the heart. Regardless of what the future brings, I shall always think the impossible, that he might just walk through the door again. Hi, dude.
It's okay. I'll just do it. I'll just do it. We'll hear next from Mustafa Fayak from the University of Manitoba.
I've known Kurt for over 25 years, which is more than half of my life. I was a graduate student of his in the University of Saskatchewan and a postdoc of his here at Queen's University. He was my mentor, my friend, but he was more. He was like family. He taught me science and how to be a scientist. It's no secret that I modeled my career after his. I aspired to be just like him. I could ask him anything about science or about wine, like, what's the difference between a Syrah and a Shiraz? And he would answer, doodly squat, which is one of his signature responses. Or when a group of us are arguing about a mineral or a rock in the field, he would intervene and say, call it butt crack, bring it back to the lab and analyze it, a philosophy I hold true today. What always surprised me, as Noel and Fred mentioned, was his incredible intelligence. He had an unusual instinct for science, a sixth sense, if you will. His curiosity, however, his curiosity for knowledge was only surpassed by his compassion for his people. He truly cared about each and every one of us here. I'll give you an example. We were a bunch of graduate students at the University of Saskatchewan, and we were hanging out at a bar, which is our usual thing to do. But that day, we, on a whim, decided to drive down from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan to Las Vegas, Nevada. What we didn't realize it was July 4th, and every hotel room in the United States was booked. So after our travels, we came back, and Kurt was just hopping mad. He was so angry with us, right? And I thought, we took off without telling him this is the reason why he was upset. Well, it wasn't until a few days later that I learned from April why he was so upset, right? He was worried about us. He was worried about where we were going to sleep. What happens if the car broke down? What happens if we slept while we were driving and ran off the road? He was worried about us. He wasn't worried about what we did or what we did. It was just an incredible time. And that's when I realized how much he cared about his students and his people. He also he never ever, although he was such a busy man, he never ever resisted from teaching us something. One day I was working in the lab, this was in Saskatchewan, and I blew up the RF generator, a piece of equipment in the lab. Chips was in the lab, and I looked at Chips, and Chips goes, well, you better go tell Kurt, right? So action I went to his office, and I'm like, Kurt, I blew off your RF generator, right? He looked at me, and I thought, okay, this is it. I'm gonna get it now. Nope, he just said, okay, let's go in the lab, and he took me to the lab, and he helped me fix it, and he showed me how to fix it. And that was Kurt. As a matter of fact, there's only one time I can recall where he was cross with us. Paul Field and I, another graduate student, had screwed up in the lab big time, right? And the reason why we screwed up in the lab big time is because, well, we were hungover. So what we did is we actually double loaded a sample and basically destroyed a week's worth of chemical extractions that April helped us with. And again, instead of getting upset with us, which I thought he would, our punishment was we had to go tell April and apologize, right? Believe me, I think Paul and I, for the first time in our lives, would have wished he would have just yelled at us than having us to do this. But, of course, April took it in stride, as she always did, and we redid the experiments, and things all worked out. I will finish here by sharing with you my last memory of Kurt. It was 6 days before he passed, and we were at our conference together in Quebec City. And April, myself, and Brandy went out to dinner, and then we met up with a couple of students afterwards and at a bar, as we usually did. And Kurt learned during the evening that Brandy and I had to catch a plane at 4 a.m. at Quebec City. Well, then he insisted we were going to drink all night long until we had to go to the airport. And this is exactly what we did. We went from one bar to the next until I finally said, look, we got to go because I had to pack. It was 3 a.m. in the morning. Right? So we said our goodbyes, and we said, see you again, because we're going to see each other again in Vienna. And what I remember from that evening is how joyous it was, how much we laughed all evening long. And this is how I'm going to remember Kurt, right? Joyous and happy. And I will cherish this memory for the rest of my life. I will miss him dearly.
So Bill McFarland is coming to speak to us now.
It's obviously with great sadness that I stand here today to pay tribute to the remarkable life of Kurt Kyser. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to tell you about a man that had a profound impact on my life. Since there have been so many well-written and said things about Kurt's scientific career, I'd like to just tell you a few personal stories. I hope they convey to you how broadly Kurt defined the term mentor, and I hope they pay adequate tribute to a man that enriched the lives of so many of his students. I had the pleasure of knowing Kurt for nearly 20 years, and over that time he was a part of nearly every important milestone in my life. As a young undergraduate student, he was certainly an inspiring teacher. But the thing that I remember most from that period of time were our regular 10K runs after school. Something very special happens when a mentor of great status gives freely and generously of his time. And on those runs, Kurt never made me feel small or unworthy despite my young age. And he always made me feel that I had something very worthwhile to contribute to the conversation. As a kid who was never academically that strong, he really helped me to gain the confidence to push myself, and he helped me to see the world in very exciting new ways. As my graduate school advisor, Kurt continued his investment in me for many years. He taught me to think critically and independently, things that every good scientist needs to know. But his greatest gift was believing in me more than I often believed in myself. I can recall vividly, still to this day, an instance where Kurt found some significant errors in a data set that was urgently needed by one of our external collaborators. And while he wrote the supporting documents, he gave me that data set to fix. So with a healthy dose of young immaturity, I said, why do I have to do it? It's not even my project. And Kurt didn't reply with anger. He didn't reply with frustration. He just said, because I know I can count on you to do it right. Those are powerful words of motivation. And another step on the road to growing up. As a boss who gave me my first real job, Kurt once again proved selfless. For any research group run on unstable sources of funding, there are always lean times. And those lean times were particularly stressful for Kurt because he knew that his staff depended on him, and he took that responsibility very seriously. I recall more than one occasion when Kurt called all of us into a meeting to tell us, don't worry, if push comes to shove, April and I will make a sacrifice to make sure everybody takes home a paycheck. And that was the thing about Kurt. He was always prepared to put the needs of others ahead of his own. And I think most importantly, he often did these things where people didn't see it happen. I really believe that character is best judged on the things that we do when no one is watching, and Kurt was exceptional in this regard. And finally, Kurt became a dear friend who continued to support and encourage me as I made my way in the world outside the university. So I'd like to describe for you one of those rare moments in life when a set of diverse experiences come together in a moment of clarity that I think sums up best what Kurt meant me on a very personal level. To set the scene, I'd like to tell you that Kurt had two offices in Miller Hall, a bright and airy inner office with high ceilings and art on the wall, and a small windowless anteroom that formed the gateway. The anteroom was fitted with a computer and a very expensive microscope and was ostensibly a place where good science was to be done. But more often than not, I think it became a graduate student waiting room. And I can remember many, many occasions waiting impatiently for Kurt to finish a phone call that just never seemed to end so that I could ask him whatever question I thought was of critical importance on that day. I'm sure many people here can know what I'm talking about. So many years after graduation, I called Kurt in the middle of what I'm sure was a very busy Tuesday afternoon. And as always, the warm greeting that I received and the friendly and collegial conversation was a high point in my day. After about an hour chatting about life, family, and maybe even a bit about geochemistry, we hung up. And as I sat in my office on the other side of the country room, I had a flashback of that anteroom. And I could picture a new crop of students sitting there thinking, thank God, now our turn will come. And it was something, in that moment, I just felt the wait all those years ago was really worth it, because he really did give you the time. In our fast-paced world, we all yearn for simple connections, the simple connections that we feel when we really believe that someone cares. And I, like so many other people, was fortunate to find that connection with Kurt. And for me, that's one of his greatest legacies. The other is the group of faces that I see before me today. Pierre Poufel said to me, this is what Kurt would have wanted, the family coming home. And I see so many people who have done that here today. So I just want to say to Kurt's wife, April, that the group of people who surround you today are the family that Kurt built. And we're your family, and we will always be here for you. So as I mourn the loss of a great friend, I am truly grateful to be a small part of that family that he built. Kurt, I owe you more than you would ever admit. You shaped who I am as a person and what I became as a professional. Thank you so much for all you did to me, and most importantly, thank you very much for being a great friend.
I'll ask Larry Lahusen to come to the stage now. Hope I said that right.
Just so you know who I am, I'm Larry Lahusen, the CEO of Uravan Minerals. Uravan worked very closely with Kurt over the years. We were his main source of insert funding. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about something Kurt's personality that I think went mostly unnoticed. Kurt Kyser was my mentor, field companion, collaborator, collaborative partner, and dear friend. Personally, I wasn't finished with Kurt yet, so I will miss him dearly. Upon introspection, I saw Kurt as a fun-loving man, embracing life, a pioneer in applied research geochemistry, who was extremely focused on innovation. Having a keen imagination and curiosity, possessing a great sense of humor, albeit cryptic at times, an objective listener, not that he suffered fools. Given the right opportunity, Kurt would always work the crowd in search of interesting conversation, challenging his students, or looking for advice from a humble junior industry CEO. He was a mineral explorer at heart, in the trenches with the rest and best of us. Central to Kurt's personality, he loved to have fun. It was all about good people, good food, the finest wine, and the occasional late-night Black Russian, or if the conversation got really serious, an Armagnac or 3, just to tap the night off. I met Kurt in 2007. Many of you have known Kurt much longer. I feel I've known him forever. At our first meeting, with the skill of a seasoned promoter seeking research funding, Kurt toured me through his infamous lab, the Queen's facility for Isotope Research, CUFR for short. I met all his technical team, a truly eclectic group of amazing analytical technicians. How could it get any better with a guy named Chips? As I came to understand, this unique group of technocrats were trained, managed, and mentored by one of the most incredible back office bosses I've ever met, April, Kurt's wife. Soon I realized Kurt had assembled a team of the most highly trained geological, geochemical specialists who operated the most sophisticated high-resolution analytical equipment that existed in North America. It was a shock and awe moment for me. As you may guess, Kurt and I hit it off at the get-go. After he toured me through the lab and hearing Kurt speak about how we were going to map buried uranium deposits at depths greater than 500 meters by sampling glacial dirt and then converting this dirt into geochemical data for drill hole targeting, I knew this was going to be a long and lasting relationship. It truly was a synchronistic moment. Kurt and I had a vision to develop new innovative exploration techniques using an assortment of unique isotopes, pathfinder elements, and microbes, no less. Ideas well beyond the conventional approaches, sampling something that he and I believed had the potential to significantly narrow the exploration window. During this period, following this intro and over the ensuing 9 years, the accomplishments of Kurt, his CUFR group, and our technical teams went beyond extraordinary, resulting in developing and applying the most sophisticated surface sampling techniques, preparation methods, and analytical geochemical technologies, unparalleled today. During this period, we completed 2 insert grants, funded 1 PhD and 1 master's student, trained a host of geological and geochemical students, completed surface geochemical studies over 2 known uranium deposits, relogged, sampled, and analyzed 48 core holes from the Saskatchewan Core Library, and completed 9 surface geochemical surveys over active projects. All this culminated in the completion of 5 drill programs on various projects, the last of which resulted in a uranium mineral discovery. I highlight these events and accomplishments to capture what Kurt was all about. Although on the surface, Kurt was recognized as a professor extraordinaire, an innovative scientist and pioneer in research geochemistry, his deeper uniqueness was more abstract and less observable until one puts all the parts together. Kurt pursued a learning approach that was innocuous, but nonetheless provocative. He constantly pushed applied research. as a teaching tool for all his students. This wasn't bench science, but in the trenches, field science. The practical side, applied side of our business, hence all the field programs and studies carried out by Kyser and Yerevan. Further, what I recognized over the years working and playing with Kurt is his uncanny ability to take an idea, put all the idiosyncratic players in a room and make it work. Make it work for all the stakeholders. A well-funded applied research project that had depth and purpose. This is a talent that will be missed, a void that will be difficult to fill. In closing, I would like to extend all my love and support to April. April, you played many roles in Kurt's life. His wife, working partner, friend, and confidant. The boss, as Kurt would say. The happy and fond memories of Kurt will support and sustain you in your journey forward. Remember, you have many great friends. Hilda and I are here for you as your dear friends. Thank you. I would like to introduce the next speaker, Dan Leighton Matthews. Everybody knows Dan, I think.
So I take great honor in being the last speaker today. So I'm going to talk about 3 stages of my life and 6 lessons that Kurt taught me along the way. I was a PhD student at the University of Toronto, and the University of Toronto has this unusual defense strategy for PhD defenses. They have one defense, then there's 3 months, and then there's a second defense. And it was approaching the first defense, and my advisors asked me who I wanted as my external advisor. So I gave them a list: Australians, people from the USGS, people from Canadian universities, and they had the list. I then did my first defense, and it went well. And afterwards, a group of graduate students and I went to the University of Toronto grad pub. And we're sitting there, and the grad student across from me, he asked me, "Who's your external going to be?" And he reached for his beer, and he started to take a sip. And I said, "It's going to be Kurt Kyser from Queen's University." And he immediately spat out his beer and said, "You poor bastard." I had never met Kurt Kyser. I only knew Kurt at that point by his reputation. And unbeknownst to me, Kurt had a reputation at conferences and talks, particularly about questions. 1, he always had them. 2, the questions were always poignant and well thought out. 3, the questions were always critical when necessary. And 4, they usually resulted in tears. So this is lesson 1, right, that he taught me, and I hadn't even met him, was choose your reviewers and your externals wisely. So Kurt came, but before he came, he had this 3-month window where he had to provide comments to me 2 weeks before the actual defense, that second and most important defense. I received nothing. 5 days before my defense, I figured I'd better email Kurt and ask him if he had any comments on my thesis. There was a quick response, and it was short. I'm in Russia. I will be at your defense. The night before my defense, I received 2 full pages of great comments on my thesis. This is where I learned lesson 2. Professors are busy, really busy. But as promised, Kurt showed up to the defense, and contrary to his reputation, his questions were fair, albeit a little bit unpredictable. The second stage of my life that Kurt influenced was my early researcher days. During a short 6-month postdoc while I was in Australia, I flew back twice to Canada to interview for faculty positions. When I arrived at Queen's, Bob Dalrymple picked me up at the hotel, the Hochelaga down the way, and he toured me through the department. And Kurt toured me through the Queen's facility for Isotope Research. His passions for isotopes and science were infectious. I could feel the love and the passion he had for that lab. I left Queen's and I desperately wanted this job, mainly because of my interactions with Kurt. And this is where I learned lesson 3 from Kurt. Be passionate about what you want to do, love what you do, and the rest will just seem natural. So during my first days, my first season of teaching here at Queen's, for some reason, students found my name hard to spit out. So they came up with an acronym for me. And it was Kurt that first told me about this acronym. We went for coffee over the bioscience complex, like we did almost religiously when he was in town. And he said to me, he goes, "Do you know what the students call you behind your back?" And before I could even respond, he said, "Well, it's not what I call you behind your back." And so I recanted what people had called me so far. I said, okay, they've called me Dr. Leighton Matthews, Professor Leighton Matthews, Professor Dr. Leighton Matthews, Dr. Leighton, Dr. Matthews. And then there was this famous dude. The skiing was so good, I just had to stay. I'm sorry I missed the first week of classes. And for some reason, this resonated with Kurt. I wasn't DLM to Kurt, I was always dude. Every single email, every single voice message, every single time I walked into the room, he called me dude. So that was lesson 4. Be careful what you tell others. So the last stage I want to talk about is my close friend years with Kurt. If Kurt and I were at Queen's together, we went for coffee. It was a ritual I enjoyed, and I now deeply miss. We talked about the labs, what was coming up, what needed to be done, or more often than not, what needed money or what needed repair. It's where we talked about our graduate students. It's where we talked about our science. It was where we talked about science that wasn't even geology. It was really anything. But most of all, it's where we talked about our lives, what we did on the weekend, what was the score of the football games, plans for travel, really anything that came to our minds. It's where we both really felt comfortable. And this was something that we have all experienced with Kurt. Regardless of who somebody was, whether they were an undergraduate student, a graduate student, a CEO, he made people feel comfortable. And he made people feel like he was actually listening and cared. So lesson 5, keep it real, dude. We're not curing cancer. One of my fondest memories, other than the times debating science over wine or coffee, was spending time with Kurt in the field. In 2015, the Association of Applied Geochemists organized a conference in Tucson, Arizona. He was strongly involved with this society. And as you've heard, he was the chief editor for their society journal, Geo. They had arranged a pre-conference field trip, a 9-day field trip going through the stratigraphy of the Grand Canyon, floating down the river. Kurt was the first person to sign up, and I was the last. He and a colleague convinced me that I had to go on this trip. I learned so much on that trip as we floated and at brief times raged down the Colorado River. Geology, yes, but I learned a lot about dreams and ambitions. On the last day of the field trip, we were going to go through a section known as Lava Falls, and it's the biggest whitewater on that section of the Colorado River. And it was formed by a volcanic eruption on the north rim. The lava flowed over, down the Grand Canyon, and dammed the Colorado River. As we approached the falls, Kurt seemed to be getting more and more excited about Lava Falls. As we turned the last corner, he told us the reason why. In 1978, he had stood on the rim of the canyon, on those very basalts, and sampled them for mantle xenoliths as part of his PhD. As he looked down on the river and Lava Falls in 1978, he promised himself that he would ride down that river and look at those rocks from a different angle. What he didn't know is that he would have to wait 36 years to do so. And this is the final lesson that I want to convey out of the hundreds of lessons that Kurt taught me. Lesson 6. Dream big and live big. Because most of all, don't forget those dreams and promises that might hibernate as life passes you by. Because one day, if you really want to, you will get to live those dreams. I will sorely miss Kurt in so many ways. I will miss the opportunity to have more lessons from him. But I do realize, as I know we all do here, that I was incredibly lucky to have Kurt as one of my academic fathers, and more importantly, a close friend. Thanks, Kurt.
So thank you again, everyone, for being here today, and for those of you also who are joining us by webcam. April's quite grateful for your presence, and it does feel like a family today. I'm just a visitor here, but it's a lovely tribute to both of you in this room, I think. So April wants you to remember that you are all invited to the two wakes in Kurt's memory this evening. The first is immediately following our time together here. We'll proceed to the University Club, and you're all welcome there. And then you're also welcome at Sir John A.'s pub this evening to carry on the festivities. April hopes that you'll bring your personal stories and reflections to continue sharing about the life of Kurt at those events. And whether you are able to make one of those wakes or not, wherever you are instructed to raise a glass in Kurt's memory tonight. Thank you for being here.